A solo hiker vanished near Jackson Hole. 20 months later, police find his clothes and phone atop a mountain, but no sign of him. Then, bones are discovered, unraveling a chilling mystery. You must join our channel and hit subscribe, because only those who seek answers to chilling disappearances will do it before this story begins. The morning air was crisp and biting as the first pale light stretched across Jackson Ridge, casting long shadows over the jagged rocks and tangled pines. A group of hikers moved cautiously along the narrow trail near the summit, their boots crunching softly against frost-covered gravel. Then one of them, a tall man with a weathered face, halted abruptly, his gaze fixed on something half-buried beneath a cluster of scrub brush. Kneeling down, he brushed away the dirt and dead leaves to reveal a worn hiking jacket, tattered and faded from the elements. Nearby, a cracked cell phone lay on the ground, its screen shattered and dark. The battery was completely drained, as if someone had deliberately switched it off or left it behind in a hurry. A cold silence hung heavy around the discovery, broken only by the faint whistle of wind weaving through the branches. News of the find traveled swiftly through the town of Ridgemont, reaching the ears of Frank Turner before the sun had fully risen. Frank's heart pounded painfully against his ribs as he raced toward the ridge, the familiar path twisting beneath his feet like a cruel reminder of all that was at stake. Years spent as a mountain rescue officer had taught him to read the land with precision, but today, every step felt heavy with dread. He gripped the straps of his pack tightly, jaw clenched, as memories surged. His son Caleb's steady voice over the phone, his last words, almost at the top, feeling good. Those words were now a fragile thread between hope and despair. Frank's breath clouded in the cold morning air as he approached the search party gathered near the discovery. His eyes scanned the scattered clothes, the cracked phone, small, silent pieces of a puzzle he refused to believe was complete. Around him, the others whispered theories and fears, but Frank's thoughts were tangled and raw. He's out here somewhere. He has to be. The years of preparation Caleb had poured into this trip echoed in Frank's mind. His son's quiet confidence, the careful planning, the months spent training to face the mountain's brutal isolation, all of it meant something. Could it still mean something? Frank's knuckles whitened as he reached down, gingerly picking up the phone, the cold biting into his fingers like a cruel reminder of time lost. Nearby, Deputy Eric Hayes watched Frank carefully, sensing the man's fragile hope battling the weight of reality. Eric was young, eager, but the grim nature of the discovery pressed on him too. He stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "Sir, we're going to organize a more thorough search right away. If there's any chance Caleb is still alive, we'll find him." Frank nodded without speaking, eyes fixed on the ridgeline disappearing into the swirling morning fog. "No one knows this mountain like I do," he thought grimly. "If he's out there, I'll find him before it's too late." As the search party fanned out, Frank's mind drifted to the last time he spoke with Caleb. The boy's restless energy had been tempered by a quiet determination, a hunger for peace away from the city's noise and chaos. His best friend Marcus had warned him, concerned but unable to hold him back. "Just be careful up there," Marcus had said, his voice edged with worry. Eyes searching for signs of hesitation Caleb refused to show. Caleb had smiled, a calm assurance that belied his youth. "I'll be fine," he had promised. Now, surrounded by the mountain's cold silence and the creeping fog that cloaked the peak, Frank felt the ache of absence keenly. The place that was supposed to bring his son peace had swallowed him whole. The wind shifted, carrying a haunting quiet broken only by the distant call of a lone hawk circling above. Frank's chest tightened as he whispered into the emptiness. "If he's here, we will find him." The words barely left his lips before the wind carried an eerie silence across the ridge. The sun was barely cresting the jagged edges of Jackson Ridge when Sheriff Logan Miles stood rigid at the trailhead, his eyes fixed on the scattered remnants of a hiker's journey. The chill in the air seemed to pierce deeper than the cold itself, and the damp scent of moss and frost clung to everything. Near a cluster of weathered pines, a worn hiking jacket lay folded oddly on a rock, and beside it, a cracked cell phone rested face down, its screen fractured like shattered glass. Logan's jaw tightened as he knelt to examine the belongings with a steady but heavy hand. "Looks like he didn't come down the mountain," Logan said quietly, his voice gravelly from years of shouting orders and calming panic. Standing beside him, Deputy Eric Hayes shifted uneasily. Young and full of ambition, Eric's eager gaze flickered between the items and the rugged mountain slope above. "We'll have to start a detailed sweep from here," Eric said, his tone betraying both determination and a hint of nervousness. "I want to cover every inch." Frank Turner, his face etched with both exhaustion and a father's desperate hope, stood a few feet away. His eyes, sharp despite the sleepless nights, never left the scene. The weight of 20 months crushed on his shoulders, but he refused to let despair claim him. "Caleb's out there somewhere," Frank muttered, his voice rough and brittle as he swallowed hard. "He's alive. He has to be." Eric caught the conviction in Frank's tone and felt the pressure settle heavier on his own chest. He wasn't just searching for a missing person. He was chasing the fragile thread of a father's hope. The team moved steadily into the forest, boots crunching over frozen leaves and brittle branches snapping underfoot. The cold nipped at their faces, the wind cutting through their jackets like an unseen blade. Eric's breath came out in frosty clouds as he scanned the uneven ground, every shadow and crevice seeming to hide secrets. After an hour's careful search, Eric halted abruptly. His gaze was drawn to a narrow crevice between two large rocks where the underbrush thinned. Something dark caught the light, a worn pair of hiking boots, half buried under a thin layer of snow and leaves. Kneeling down, Eric carefully pulled them free. The boots were scuffed and weathered, the laces frayed, but unmistakably sturdy. "This has to be Caleb's," Eric whispered, the hairs on his neck prickling with unease. "Why would boots be hidden here like this?" Frank approached silently, his eyes fixed on the boots. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached out but stopped himself before touching them. "Not random," he said grimly. "He wouldn't leave them here by accident." The moment hung heavy between them, the stillness of the mountain pressing in. Eric's gut twisted with the unspoken truth. This wasn't just a lost hiker's trail. Something else had happened. As they moved deeper along the frozen creek that cut a jagged line through the ridge, the terrain grew treacherous, slick rocks glazed with ice, steep banks threatening a fatal slip. The search party advanced carefully, eyes peeled for any sign. Suddenly, Frank stopped, his face paling. At the edge of the creek, partially concealed beneath a thin crust of ice and snow, lay scattered bone fragments. Eric knelt, his breath catching as he picked up a small, weathered piece. "God!" Frank's voice cracked, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The father's denial fought against the harsh reality that the mountain was speaking a terrible truth. Eric swallowed hard, glancing at the fragment as dread seeped into his thoughts. "We need to call this in. Forensics has to confirm what we're looking at." Frank's eyes flickered with pain and guilt. He turned away, the wind tugging at his coat as if trying to shake the weight of his regret. In a moment of quiet solitude, he muttered under his breath, "I should have stopped him." The words echoed faintly through the cold air, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the ridge. The mystery deepened when the search team uncovered bone fragments near a frozen creek halfway up the trail. The evidence suggested Caleb's fate was far worse than anyone dared admit. The bone fragments lay cold and silent under the harsh fluorescent lights of the county lab, a grim puzzle piece that shattered the fragile hope hanging over Ridgemont. Dr. Simon Gray, a tall man with sharp eyes behind round glasses, moved deliberately, his fingers steady but his face tight with the weight of what he might uncover. Each fragment was a whisper from the mountain, a secret begging to be told. "We need to be certain before we draw any conclusions," Simon said quietly, his voice low and precise as he examined a small tooth through a magnifying glass. The faint buzz of lab equipment filled the room, but Simon's attention was unyielding. Outside the sterile lab, the town was gripped by a silent panic. News of the bones had spread like wildfire, igniting fear in the hearts of those who had prayed for Caleb's safe return. At the sheriff's office, Logan Miles sat behind his desk, the lines on his weathered face deepening with worry. He tapped a pen rhythmically, glancing at a photo of Caleb pinned to the bulletin board. A young man frozen in time, smiling with an easy confidence. The room smelled faintly of coffee and stale paper, but the atmosphere was heavy, suffocating even. "We can't afford to lose control of this," Logan muttered to himself, then called Deputy Eric Hayes in. Eric entered the office briskly, his youthful face marked by determination yet shadowed by doubt. "Sheriff," he said, trying to steady his voice, "Dr. Gray is running tests now. They found something odd, like someone tampered with the remains." Logan's eyes narrowed. "Tampered how?" Eric hesitated, then added, "A tooth. It has a tiny drill hole, like someone was trying to hide what it really was." The words hung in the air like a thundercloud ready to burst. Meanwhile, miles away, deep in the wilderness, Frank Turner sat alone beside a crackling fire, the chill of the mountain night biting into his weathered skin. His breath came in shallow puffs, visible in the cold air. The distant howl of a lone wolf echoed across the ridge, mingling with the rustle of pines swaying in the wind. Frank's hands clenched into fists, the flames reflecting the fierce anger burning inside him. Next to him, Eric sat uneasily on a log, glancing around as shadows danced in the firelight. "Do you ever get used to this silence?" Eric asked, his voice breaking the stillness. Frank shook his head, eyes fixed on the dark treeline. "No," he replied hoarsely. "It's like the mountains holding its breath. And sometimes, I swear I hear Caleb's voice carried by the wind." His voice cracked, betraying a vulnerability he rarely showed. Eric shifted, meeting Frank's gaze with quiet sympathy. "You think he's still out here?" Frank's lips pressed into a thin line. "I have to believe that. It's what keeps me going." The nights were restless. Strange noises, cracking branches, distant footsteps, stirred unease in the camp. Each sound set Frank's heart racing, memories flooding back of his son's last message. Almost at the top, feeling good, the hope that Caleb was alive clashed with the grim reality before them. Tension simmered between the two men, a silent battle of grief and procedure. Frank's anger simmered beneath the surface, often spilling into terse words. Eric, fresh from the academy, wrestled with his role, respecting Frank's pain while needing to follow the law. "We can't just chase ghosts," Eric said one night, rubbing his temples after a fitful sleep. Frank's glare was sharp. "Maybe not, but ghosts can still haunt the living." Back in Ridgemont, rumors twisted through the streets like a creeping fog. At the local diner, voices dropped to hushed whispers as patrons spoke of illegal logging deep in the woods, machines tearing through ancient trees under cover of darkness. Others murmured about poachers, using the mountain's isolation for secret hunts. "Maybe Caleb found something he shouldn't have," an old man said grimly, stirring his coffee. "That's why he's gone." The seed of fear took root, spreading unease through the community. Meanwhile, Dr. Gray's work progressed with slow, exacting care. The drill hole in the tooth was a chilling detail, an attempt to erase identity, to mask the victim. "This isn't accidental," Simon told Eric during a briefing at the sheriff's office, holding up detailed images on his tablet. "Someone wanted these remains to go unnoticed, hidden beneath the mountain's shadows." Eric swallowed hard, the reality sinking deeper. This was no accident. Caleb's disappearance was wrapped in something dark and deliberate. Frank listened from the edge of the room, fists clenched at his sides. His mind raced with questions and doubts, but beneath it all burned a single truth. He would find out what happened to his son, no matter the cost. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling windows and carrying with it the mountain's ancient secrets. Frank's voice was barely a whisper as he stared into the fading light. "I hear things. I feel like he's still out here somewhere." Eric listened, realizing the emotional toll the case had taken on the family. Rumors began to swirl that Caleb might have stumbled onto something dangerous. Some suggested illegal logging in the area. Others hinted at poachers using the remote mountain for secret hunts. No one knew for sure. As Simon uncovered new details about the bone fragments, he found something disturbing. A tooth with a small drill hole, implying someone had tried to disguise the remains. The discovery of the drilled tooth lay heavy on the table, its small, smooth surface catching the harsh fluorescent light of the sheriff's office like a silent accusation. Frank Turner sat rigid, his jaw clenched, eyes burning with a mix of grief and fury. The room felt colder somehow, the air thick with a tension that stretched between the men like an invisible wire ready to snap. "This isn't just nature," Frank said, voice low but hard, each word deliberate and sharp. "Someone tried to hide the truth." He slammed a fist lightly on the table, leaning forward, his gaze locked on Sheriff Miles, who avoided eye contact, his face a carefully controlled mask. Sheriff Logan Miles ran a hand through his thinning hair, the weight of years and politics pressing down on him. "Frank, we're doing everything we can," he said cautiously, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his unease. "But we have protocols, and there are powerful people involved. We have to tread carefully." Frank's eyes flashed, anger simmering beneath his sorrow. "Tread carefully? My son's out there, and you want to play politics?" His voice rose, echoing in the cramped room. Deputy Eric Hayes shifted uncomfortably, caught between his respect for Frank and his loyalty to the sheriff's office. The tooth sat like a grim reminder of the stakes, evidence that Caleb's disappearance was no accident, but a calculated attempt to erase him. Eric pulled up Caleb's last known messages on his tablet, the encrypted lines scrolling slowly across the screen. "I found these," Eric said, breaking the heavy silence. Encrypted messages Caleb sent days before his hike. His fingers hesitated over the screen, his brow furrowed. "Looks like he was in contact with someone. A known contact. He was digging into something, illegal mining activity around the mountain." Frank's shoulders tensed, memories of Caleb's cautious warnings surfacing. "He told me he was close to exposing something," Frank muttered. "But I didn't think it was this serious." Sheriff Miles pinched the bridge of his nose, already feeling the pressure from local business leaders who wanted the investigation wrapped up and buried. "If this gets out, it could ruin people," Miles said quietly, but Frank saw the fear beneath the words. Just then, the door creaked open, and Marcus stepped in. His presence was a sudden surge of energy, eyes sharp, posture tense but determined. "I'm back," Marcus said, voice steady but edged with urgency. "I've been looking into Caleb's stuff while I was away. There's more here than we thought." Frank's gaze softened briefly, hope flickering in the shadow of his grief. Marcus moved to the corner of the room and pulled a battered backpack from under a table, setting it down with a thud. He opened it, revealing notebooks, a battered laptop, and a stack of printed maps. "Caleb was scared," Marcus said, flipping through a notebook filled with scribbled notes and hastily drawn diagrams. "He told me he thought he was being followed. Weeks before he disappeared. He said people didn't want him asking questions." Eric leaned closer, scanning a map marked with red circles and arrows. "This mining company," Eric said. "They're hiding something. Permits that look legal, but there's a trail leading to places no one in town has actually seen." Frank's fists clenched as he looked over the papers. "They're using the mountain to cover illegal work, poisoning the land." And Caleb got too close. The room's shadows seemed to grow darker, heavier. The stakes weren't just about a missing son anymore. They were about corruption, power, and a secret someone was desperate to keep hidden. Hours later, Marcus and Eric sat in a small, dimly lit cabin near the mountain's edge, surrounded by Caleb's scattered notes and electronic devices humming softly. The fire crackled low in the stove, casting flickering light on their focused faces. The cabin walls pressed close, as if trying to trap them in a silence thick with fear and determination. "Every clue leads deeper," Marcus said, voice tight but resolute. "If Caleb was right, this goes beyond just mining. Someone's protecting this with everything they've got." Eric rubbed his temple, the exhaustion of sleepless nights settling in. "We're running out of time, Marcus. And if they're watching—" His words trailed off as a sudden chill swept through the cabin. Outside, unseen in the darkness beyond the frost-lined window, a shadowy figure stood motionless. His eyes glinted cold and watchful, fixed on the cabin's pale light. The wind whispered past him, carrying the faint crackle of their voices, and the promise of danger lurking just beyond the fragile walls. The pieces were beginning to fit, but every step closer to the truth made the danger grow. One evening, as Marcus and Eric sifted through Caleb's notes in a dimly lit cabin, a shadowy figure watched from outside, unseen. The soft crunch of gravel under worn tires was the first sound to break the heavy silence of the evening. Marcus's car sat crushed against the ancient oak that bordered the narrow dirt road leading to Frank's cabin. The twisted metal gleamed faintly under the weak moonlight, shards of broken glass glittering like scattered stars across the dirt. Marcus stood frozen beside the wreck, chest rising and falling rapidly, hands trembling as he pressed them against his face. His heart hammered not just from the shock of the crash but from the unmistakable message the attack conveyed. Eric knelt beside him, eyes scanning the damage with sharp, calculating intensity. "You okay, Marcus?" His voice was calm but edged with concern, the weight of the situation settling on his broad shoulders. "This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted to make sure you didn't keep digging." Marcus swallowed hard, swallowing back a rush of anger and fear. "I'm fine. I got lucky." His voice cracked despite his efforts to sound steady. "But this means they're watching us. Closer than we thought." Frank arrived moments later, his heavy boots thudding on the loose gravel as he approached. His eyes, sharp despite the lines of exhaustion etched deep on his face, immediately took in the damage. His jaw clenched, and a slow, furious fire ignited in his gaze. "You need to be more careful," he said quietly but firmly, his voice carrying a protective edge. "This isn't just a warning, it's a threat." Marcus met Frank's eyes, determination burning through the uncertainty. "We can't stop now, not when we're this close. Caleb's truth is buried in those mountains, and we owe it to him to bring it out." Eric nodded, glancing warily into the shadowed tree line. "We've stepped into a lion's den. Whoever's behind this knows exactly what we're after, and they're willing to fight dirty." The night air was thick with tension, the scent of pine and damp earth mingling with the metallic tang of spilled oil and broken glass. The moon cast long, distorted shadows, and somewhere in the distance, an owl's mournful call echoed, an eerie soundtrack to their growing peril. Back inside Frank's cabin, the group gathered around the battered kitchen table, cluttered with maps, photographs, and Caleb's notes. The flickering candlelight danced across their faces, highlighting the weariness etched deep in their eyes. Frank leaned over the maps, tracing a jagged path through the mountain ridges with a shaking finger. "Weller's operation runs deeper than we realized," Frank said, voice low but resolute. "This isn't just mining. It's a carefully hidden web of corruption, businessmen, officials, even some law enforcement. They're all in on it." Marcus frowned, rubbing his temples as he absorbed the weight of the revelation. Caleb must have stumbled onto something they couldn't afford to have exposed. That's why he's gone. Eric slammed a fist on the table, frustration boiling over. "They silenced him, and now they're trying to scare us off." Frank's eyes hardened. "We won't let that happen, but we have to be smart. We need to plan carefully, move when they least expect it." The room fell silent for a moment, the only sound the crackle of the fireplace and their steady breaths. Then, Marcus's phone buzzed sharply, breaking the fragile calm. He glanced at the screen, his face paling as he read the message. "Stop digging or you'll disappear like Caleb." He looked up, voice steady but cold. "They're not just watching, they're threatening. They want us gone." Frank slammed his hand against the table, voice rising with barely contained rage. "They'll have to kill me first." Eric exhaled slowly, glancing toward the dark window. "We're not just fighting nature anymore." The crunch of twisted metal still echoed in the cold night air as Marcus stared at the wreckage of his car, smoke curling upward like a dark, accusing finger. The front end was smashed beyond recognition. Shards of glass glittered across the dirt road, and the faint smell of gasoline lingered, sharp and biting. Marcus's hands trembled slightly, the adrenaline slowly fading, but relief coursed through him. He was alive. He took a shaky breath and wiped sweat from his brow, muscles aching from the sudden jolt of the crash and the fight to escape. The shadow of a figure had darted away moments before the collision, but the message was clear. This fight was far from over. By the time Marcus reached the cabin, the air inside was thick with tension, the walls seeming to close in under the weight of secrets and unspoken fears. Frank sat near the fireplace, his gaze sharp but heavy with grief. The flickering flames cast long shadows across his worn face, tracing the lines carved by sleepless nights and relentless worry. Eric stood near the window, his posture stiff but alert, eyes flicking to every sound outside. The night felt endless, each heartbeat loud in the silence. Frank's voice cut through the quiet, low and resolute. "We can't back down now. Caleb's death won't be in vain." His words were steady but carried the raw edge of pain and determination. He leaned forward, hands clenched on his knees, eyes burning with a fire that no grief could extinguish. "They think they can scare us off. They don't know who they're dealing with." Eric shifted, the weight of new realities pressing down on him like a stone. His face, still youthful, betrayed the tension in his jaw. "It's not just about the mountain anymore, is it?" His voice was soft but firm, a mix of fear and resolve. "This corruption, it goes deeper than we imagined." He glanced at Marcus, who nodded without speaking, fingers already moving over the worn keyboard of his laptop, decrypting fragments of Caleb's last messages. The glow of the screen illuminated Marcus's focused expression, eyes sharp behind the rim of his glasses, lips pressed into a thin line. Marcus's fingers paused briefly as he uncovered names, dates, and coded plans. The pieces formed a grim mosaic, supply routes, bribes, shipments cloaked in lies. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "They're moving something big. Illegal explosives, toxic waste. It's worse than we thought." He looked up, meeting Frank's steady gaze. "We need to follow the shipments, track every move they make." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth dampened by recent rain. The cabin felt like a fragile refuge amidst the growing storm, but the danger was closing in. Frank stood, his broad shoulders squared as he paced slowly. "We'll plan tonight. Tomorrow we hit their routes hard." His tone was a mix of command and conviction, born from years of leading mountain rescues but now fueled by a more personal mission. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond the safety of the cabin, Sheriff Logan Miles sat alone in his dimly lit office, the weight of divided loyalties heavy on his chest. His fingers hovered over the phone but never dialed. Political pressure from powerful figures aligned with Weller wrapped around him like chains. He stared at the framed photo on his desk, his family smiling back, and his jaw tightened. Could he protect them if he spoke out? Could he live with himself if he stayed silent? The next morning, a local logger, weathered and cautious, approached Marcus under the gray light of dawn. His eyes darted nervously, hands shaking as he whispered, "There's a shipment coming today. Heavy guards. Something they don't want noticed." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold mountain air. "Where?" His voice was sharp, urgency rising. The logger named a narrow mountain pass seldom traveled, a perfect spot for an ambush or exposure. Back at the cabin, the team moved swiftly but quietly, packing gear and mapping the route. Frank's steady leadership steadied the others, even as their hearts hammered with the knowledge that this mission could change everything, or end it. Eric checked his radio, scanning the woods with a practiced eye, every crack of a twig setting his nerves on edge. Marcus tightened the strap on his backpack, laptop secured, mind racing through contingencies. Frank's gaze swept the faces around him, grief, fear, but also fierce resolve reflected in each pair of eyes. "We're running out of time," Marcus warned. The narrow mountain pass lay shrouded in early morning mist, the chill in the air biting at exposed skin and turning every breath into a white plume. Frank crouched low behind a thick cluster of pines, his seasoned eyes scanning the winding road below with the steady focus of a man who had spent decades navigating these wild heights. Beside him, Marcus's fingers trembled slightly as he gripped his camera, The small device aimed at the approaching convoy, while Deputy Eric steadied his breathing, trying to silence the rapid pounding of his heart. The tension was suffocating. One wrong move here could unravel everything they had risked so far. The distant rumble of engines grew louder, echoing through the trees like a drumbeat of danger. Shadows emerged from the fog, monstrous trucks crawling slowly over the rocky road. The vehicles were heavily modified, reinforced bumpers, tinted windows, and the unmistakable presence of armed guards perched atop the beds, their cold eyes scanning the treeline. Marcus's camera clicked quietly as he captured every detail, sweat dampening his brow despite the cold. "Here they come," he whispered, voice barely audible. Frank's jaw tightened. "Keep steady. Get as much as you can." His voice was low but firm, a steady anchor in the storm of adrenaline. Eric crouched beside them, clutching a small radio but unwilling to break the silence. He knew any noise could give them away. His mind raced with questions. What exactly were they hauling? How deep did Weller's corruption reach? And more frighteningly, how far would those men go to protect their secrets? Suddenly, a sharp crackle shattered the quiet. A radio call from one of the convoy's vehicles. The words were clipped and coded, sharp enough to slice through the tension. "Eyes on movement at grid 927. Possible observers." The words sent an icy chill down Marcus's spine. Someone had noticed them. The team froze, exchanging tense glances. Frank's fingers tightened around his binoculars as he scanned the shadows beyond the road. For a moment, nothing moved. "Keep recording," Frank ordered, voice low but urgent. "We don't leave empty-handed." The convoy crept forward, unaware of the silent eyes tracking every inch. Marcus caught the license plates on film, a string of numbers and letters that would soon be crucial evidence. The truck's cargo was equally telling, barrels shaped like they should carry harmless supplies, but something about their color and seal whispered danger. As the convoy passed, Marcus zoomed in on crates marked with warning symbols barely visible in the dim light. His stomach knotted with fear. When the last truck rumbled past, the team didn't hesitate. They melted back into the dense forest, branches clawing at their clothes, the dry leaves crackling underfoot threatening to betray their position. Frank's breath came heavy, but his gaze was sharp. "Move fast. They'll be looking for us." Back at the cabin later that afternoon, the atmosphere was thick with dread. The three men huddled around a flickering laptop screen, the footage rolling again and again as they pieced together what they had seen. Marcus pointed with a shaky finger. "Explosives and toxic waste, hidden in plain sight." His voice cracked, the weight of realization sinking in. Frank's face went pale, a mix of anger and grief swirling in his eyes. Caleb was right. They're poisoning this mountain. His voice broke on the last word, trembling like a man holding back a storm of emotions. He leaned back, rubbing his face with rough hands that had known too much pain. Eric's jaw clenched, his uniform feeling heavier with every passing moment. This isn't just about money or power anymore. It's life and death. For the mountain, for everyone who depends on it. As the men absorbed the magnitude of the threat, a quiet fear crept in, not just of Weller's ruthless operation, but of the shadows lurking closer than they realized. Sheriff Logan Miles sat alone in his office miles away, the glow of his computer casting long shadows across his tired face. He watched the news reports of the ongoing investigation, his fingers hovering over the phone. The choice weighed heavily: to act and risk everything, or remain silent and let the corruption fester. His breath hitched as memories of threats and warnings flickered in his mind. He swallowed hard, guilt settling deep in his chest. Meanwhile, unseen but always present, the shadowy figure who had haunted Marcus and Eric's steps moved with calculated patience. His eyes gleamed cold in the dark as he watched the team's every move, waiting for the moment to strike again. That night, Marcus returned to the cabin to find his sanctuary violated. His laptop lay in ruins on the floor, screen cracked and lifeless. Beneath the shattered remains, a chilling note was pinned, its black ink stark against white paper: "Last chance." The small cabin was dimly lit by a single flickering lamp, casting long shadows that danced across the rough wooden walls. Marcus sat hunched over his laptop, his fingers flying over the keys with a desperate urgency. The note he found pinned beneath the shattered keyboard gnawed at him. Last chance. Each word burned like ice in his mind, a silent threat that the stakes had never been higher. He paused, breathing heavily, trying to steady his shaking hands. Around him, Frank's tired eyes bored into the cracked window, and Eric paced restlessly, the tension thick enough to choke. Marcus glanced up, meeting Frank's gaze, where grief mingled with fierce determination. "We're running out of time," Marcus said quietly, voice low but firm. "If we don't get this out now, all of Caleb's work and his sacrifice will be for nothing." Frank's jaw clenched. His voice was rough with exhaustion and pain. "We can't stop. Not now. Not after everything." He shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his son's absence pressing deep into his bones. Caleb faced this head-on. "So must we." Eric stopped pacing and folded his arms, concern clouding his youthful features. "Are we really ready for what's coming? Once this hits the media, it won't just be words on paper. There will be backlash, maybe worse." His voice trembled just slightly, betraying the fear he tried to hide. Marcus leaned forward, eyes blazing. "Caleb knew the risks. We all do. But silence means death. To the truth and to the mountain." With Frank's quiet nod of approval, Marcus had started feeding carefully gathered evidence to an investigative journalist from the city. Anonymous emails packed with documents, photos, and encrypted files found their way into the hands of a reporter hungry for a story that could shake foundations. The journalist's voice was steady and sincere during their late-night calls, promising to protect their sources while unveiling the truth. When the news broke, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Headlines screamed of corruption, environmental hazards, and cover-ups that stretched into the heart of Ridgemont's power structure. The town became a tinderbox of divided loyalties. In the local diner, voices rose in heated debates over coffee and cheap meals. Farmers and miners argued with environmentalists and town officials, each side convinced of their righteousness. Weller wasted no time crafting his defense. His polished public statements rang with indignation and denial, accusing the media of slander and the investigators of treason. Behind the scenes, his allies in politics and business rallied to discredit the evidence and intimidate those involved. The defamation lawsuit was filed swiftly, a sword hanging ominously over Marcus, Frank, and Eric. Sheriff Logan Miles, who had remained silent since the evidence surfaced, finally called a town meeting in the aged community hall. The atmosphere inside was suffocating, thick with unease and anger. Men from every corner of Ridgemont filled the wooden benches, faces set in grim lines or contorted with frustration. The murmurs swelled into sharp whispers and bursts of heated conversation. Frank stepped to the front, his hands trembling slightly but his voice strong as he addressed the crowd. "My son disappeared on this mountain. He wanted to protect it just like we all should. The evidence we found is real, and it demands our attention." For a moment, the room was silent, hanging on his words. Then, from the back, a tall figure rose slowly, his presence like a shadow stretching across the gathering. Liam Cross, the name whispered in hushed tones. But here he was, standing boldly beneath the dim lights, his face unreadable but his eyes cold and hard. His posture was confident, almost arrogant, and as he spoke, his voice was calm yet laced with menace. "This investigation ends now," Liam declared, scanning the room with a steely gaze. "Those who push this further will find themselves vanished, just like Caleb Turner." A shudder rippled through the hall. Some men shifted uneasily, while others met Liam's threat with silence or grim determination. Frank's heart hammered fiercely in his chest, but he refused to look away. His voice was steady, though fierce beneath the surface. "We will not be silenced." Marcus, standing near the front with Eric, exchanged a tense glance. The danger was no longer distant. It was here, personal and immediate. Every shadow outside the window seemed to close in, and the weight of their fight settled like a stone in their stomachs. The local economy, fragile and strained, trembled beneath the pressure. But the mountain's secrets refused to stay buried. The battle for truth and justice had only just begun. Sheriff Miles finally broke his silence, calling a town meeting to address the allegations. The room was packed with angry voices, fear, and denial. As Frank spoke about his son's disappearance, a man in the back stood up. It was the shadowy figure, revealing himself as Liam Cross, Weller's personal security chief, and he threatened violence if the investigation continued. If that moment sent chills down your spine, don't stay silent. Subscribe and become a member, because uncovering the truth takes courage and persistence. Liam Cross stood near the back of the crowded town hall, his tall frame rigid as the room fell into an uneasy silence. The murmurs that had filled the air just moments before evaporated under the weight of his cold, unwavering glare. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the tension like a blade, low but carrying undeniable authority. If this investigation continues, there will be consequences. You've all seen what happens to those who dig too deep. His words hung heavy, a veiled threat that rippled through the crowd like a cold wind. Faces turned pale. Some swallowed hard, others glanced nervously toward the exits. Men who had hoped for justice now felt the paralyzing grip of fear. Frank Turner's eyes locked onto Liam's, fire burning beneath the sorrow. Every muscle in Frank's body tightened as he clenched his fists at his sides. This won't stop me. Not now. Not ever. Marcus's jaw clenched. He could feel the weight of Liam's intimidation, but it only fueled his determination. Leaning close to the journalist sitting beside him, Marcus whispered, "We need to push harder. The truth has to come out no matter what." The journalist's eyes flicked toward the menacing figure in the shadows but nodded, fingers already poised to type. Meanwhile, the harsh glow of surveillance cameras tracked every movement Liam made, capturing his focused, watchful gaze as he scrutinized the investigators and informants. It was no mere show of strength. It was calculated control. Sheriff Logan Miles tried to maintain order, his voice strained and uneven as he called for calm. "Let's keep this respectful, gentlemen. We're here for answers." Yet behind his measured tone, Miles's hands trembled slightly. The pressure from both sides, the angry townsfolk desperate for justice and the powerful men threatening silence, weighed on him like a storm cloud ready to break. Away from the meeting's glare, Eric Hayes sat in his cramped office, the dull hum of the ceiling fan barely masking his racing thoughts. The file on his desk lay open, exposing documents that made his blood run cold. Reports of suspicious payments, unsigned contracts, and coded bank transfers pointed to a network of bribery involving local officials. The betrayal stung deeply. Men sworn to protect their community were selling it for personal gain. Eric's hands tightened into fists. How long has this been going on? And how many more are involved? His mind flashed to Frank, Marcus, and the others risking everything to expose this rotten core. That night, the mountain was silent except for the occasional whisper of wind through pine branches. The team had set up camp near the ridge, its rocky silhouette dark against a sky strewn with stars. The fire's glow flickered weakly, barely pushing back the encroaching shadows. Eric's sharp eyes scanned the tree line when suddenly, movement caught his attention. Figures slipped between the trees, their footsteps muffled but deliberate. Liam's men, patrolling the perimeter like ghosts. The unease tightened in Eric's chest. Every second they lingered increased the risk of discovery and destruction of the fragile evidence they'd uncovered. Huddled close, Eric shared his concerns in a low voice that barely stirred the air. "They're out there, watching us. We can't let them wipe this clean before we finish." Frank's face was grim, lined with exhaustion but fierce with resolve. Marcus's fingers danced over his tablet, decrypting Caleb's last messages, searching for a way to stay one step ahead. The night felt colder, the mountain less forgiving. A quiet desperation settled over them, tempered only by their shared purpose. "We're running out of time, and allies," Eric whispered. The cold mountain air bit sharply at their faces as Frank led the way, every step careful and deliberate. His boots crunched softly on the frost-hardened ground, eyes scanning the shadows cast by towering pine trees. Marcus and Eric followed close behind, muscles tense, hearts pounding in the fragile silence that cloaked the forbidden zone. The smell of damp earth and pine needles filled their lungs, mixing with the faint metallic scent of machinery buried beneath thick tarps ahead. Frank's years of mountain rescue whispered through his every movement, an instinct honed by countless rescues and dangerous climbs. "Keep low," he whispered, voice rough but steady, his hand signaling for caution. "We don't know who might be watching." Marcus's fingers trembled slightly as he readied his camera, the lens trained on the concealed excavation site barely visible through the thinning trees. His mind raced, adrenaline sharpening every sense. This was more than just a search for clues now. It was a battle against an unseen enemy with everything to lose. They moved as one, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on them like the low-hanging clouds. When they reached the edge of the dig, the scene was worse than they had imagined. Massive crates, stamped with bright red warnings, sat half-buried in muddy piles, marked clearly as illegal explosives. Nearby, rusted barrels leaked dark liquid, their labels faded but unmistakably toxic. The ground was scarred from heavy equipment, deep grooves cutting across the once pristine mountain floor. Marcus crouched quickly, snapping photos, every click of the shutter a lifeline to the truth they sought. His heart thudded painfully as he rifled through scattered papers, lifting out documents stained with mud and sweat. Names of government officials and law enforcement officers sprawled across the pages in official stamps and signatures. Corruption was etched in ink and paper, tying powerful men to the destruction they'd vowed to hide. Suddenly, a shout shattered the fragile quiet, distant but growing louder, sending a shiver down their spines. "They've seen us," Eric hissed, eyes wide with panic as footsteps thundered closer. Frank's jaw tightened, a flash of steel in his gaze. "Move, now." Without hesitation, Frank's experience took over. "Cover the evidence," he barked, his voice commanding and sharp. "Marcus, grab what you can. Eric, watch our backs." The trio melted into the trees, adrenaline pushing them through the twisting underbrush as the voices behind them grew frantic, weapons clinking in the distance. Their breaths came ragged and fast, muscles burning, but Frank refused to slow. The evidence was their only chance to expose the truth. They couldn't let it slip away. "Keep your heads down," he ordered, dragging Marcus and Eric toward a narrow ravine that could provide temporary cover. As they scrambled down, Marcus clutched his camera tight, fingers stained with grime, heart heavy with the knowledge that every second counted. The crackling sounds of searchers pounding through the woods were relentless. From somewhere behind the trees, a sudden crash hinted that their pursuers were closing in. Eventually, they found refuge in a cluster of dense bushes, breaths shallow and eyes scanning the darkened forest. Frank's hand trembled slightly as he wiped dirt and soot from his face, the weight of near capture settling on him like a stone. "We got what we came for," he said, voice hoarse but resolute. "Let's get out of here before it's too late." Back in Ridgemont, a different kind of devastation awaited them. Flames licked hungrily at the night sky, the orange glow swallowing the modest cabin that had been their sanctuary and storehouse of Caleb's notes and hard-won evidence. Marcus stood frozen, the heat brushing his face as he watched the fire consume years of work, years of hope, in a merciless blaze. Smoke stung his eyes and thickened his throat. His chest tightened painfully, not from the heat but from the crushing weight of loss and betrayal. "No," he whispered, voice breaking. "No, no, no." Eric reached out, placing a steady hand on Marcus's shoulder, grounding him. "It's not over," he said quietly, though his own eyes betrayed the growing fear they all felt. "But someone wants us gone, wants the truth buried." Frank arrived, face streaked with soot and exhaustion, jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. His eyes swept over the wreckage, fury bubbling beneath the surface but tempered by sorrow. "This wasn't an accident," he said with cold certainty. "They're trying to erase us." The fire's crackle was drowned out by a distant siren wailing in the night, but for the trio, The sound only echoed the growing danger closing in on them. News of the fire spread quickly through the town. Whispers of intimidation and threats reached every corner. The fragile alliances in Ridgemont began to crumble as fear took root. Sheriff Logan Miles, weighed down by the swirling political pressure and the collapse of the investigation's foundation, quietly handed in his resignation. No public announcement, no fanfare, just a name on a paper and a door closing behind him. Marcus heard the news hours later, feeling the ground shift beneath his feet. The man who should have stood as a protector had stepped away, leaving them exposed. "What now?" Eric asked, his voice tight with uncertainty as they gathered beneath the darkened sky. Frank looked up, eyes burning with fierce determination, the lines of grief carved deep into his face. "We have to finish this," he said fiercely, wiping soot from his face. "We have to finish this." The flames had consumed the cabin in a matter of minutes, the crackling fire swallowing years of painstaking work, memories, and the fragile hope they clung to. Frank Turner stood at the edge of the smoldering ruins, his eyes burning with unshed tears and rage. The acrid smoke clawed at his throat, but he barely noticed. Beside him, Marcus's hands trembled as he sifted through the blackened debris, desperately searching for anything salvageable. Eric Hayes, usually steady and composed, looked pale and tense, his jaw clenched as he surveyed the devastation. "We can't let this stop us," Frank said, his voice low but firm. He wiped soot from his weathered face and met their eyes. "Caleb wouldn't want us giving up now." The others nodded, though the weight of loss pressed heavily on their chests. The old hunting lodge was miles deeper into the forest, hidden beneath towering pines and thick underbrush. The air here was cooler, damp with the scent of moss and earth, a stark contrast to the harsh burn of the cabin's remains. As they stepped inside, the wooden beams creaked underfoot, and dust danced in shafts of fading sunlight filtering through grimy windows. It was cramped and dim, but it was theirs, a sanctuary from the hostile world closing in around them. Marcus immediately set up his battered laptop on a rough-hewn table, the screen flickering as he booted it up. "I'm going to try to recover what I can," he said, voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into his face. His fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, coaxing fragmented files from the wreckage of the burned data. Eric paced near the door, phone pressed to his ear. "I've reached out to an old contact," he said without looking up. "A military buddy with experience in protective detail. If things escalate, we'll need more than luck on our side." His tone was cautious but hopeful, the first flicker of optimism in days. Frank sank into a creaky chair, rubbing his hands over his face as the silence settled. The grief that had haunted him since Caleb's disappearance was a cold weight, both a torment and a fuel. Memories of his son flashed vividly, the quiet confidence, the restless spirit, the plans to escape the noise of city life for one last trek to the ridge. That night, the three men sat close around a flickering lantern, its warm glow barely keeping the darkness at bay. The forest outside whispered with the rustle of leaves and distant calls of unseen creatures. The tension between them was thick, a mixture of exhaustion, fear, and unspoken truths. Frank broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I've never told you," he began, eyes fixed on the dancing flame. "Years ago, before Caleb ever set foot on that mountain, I stumbled on whispers about Weller's deals. Shady permits, backdoor agreements. I wanted to stop it, but the threats were real. Against me, against my family. I stayed silent." Marcus's eyes widened, the pieces clicking into place. "That's why Weller's operation runs so deep. It's been protected for decades." Eric's fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't just about Caleb anymore. It's a network, powerful men, hidden in the shadows, covering tracks and crushing anyone who gets too close." Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere nearby, the dark presence of Liam Cross's operatives crept closer, relentless in their mission to intimidate and silence. The weight of unseen eyes pressed down on the lodge. Suddenly, Marcus's phone buzzed sharply. He pulled it from his pocket, eyes scanning an encrypted message that blinked on the screen. The words were brief, mysterious. Ally inside Weller's operation. Instructions to follow. Trust carefully. A slow smile curved Marcus's lips, cautious but hopeful. We might finally have a way in, he said, voice low but steady, meeting Frank and Eric's eyes. The three men exchanged a glance, a fragile spark of hope amid the gathering storm. Night had fallen over the rugged terrain, swallowing the mining compound in deep shadows. Marcus crouched behind a rusted shipping container, his breath steady but shallow, eyes scanning the flicker of distant patrol lights. Eric was just a few feet away, gripping his flashlight tightly, the beam dimmed to avoid detection. The air was thick with tension and the faint metallic smell of machinery. Somewhere nearby, a generator hummed, broken only by the occasional clank of equipment being moved in the darkness. Ghost's directions were clear, Marcus whispered, fingers trembling as he double-checked the hastily sketched map. The data cache should be inside the old processing bunker, behind that stack of crates. His voice was low but edged with urgency, eyes darting toward the entrance guarded by two armed men pacing slowly. The realization settled in, this was no longer a simple trespass. Every step was a gamble with their lives. Eric swallowed hard but nodded. We move on my count. 3, 2, 1. They slipped from their cover, bodies pressed against cold metal walls as they edged toward the bunker. The crunch of gravel beneath Eric's boot made Marcus flinch, but the guards were momentarily distracted, exchanging tired banter. They slipped inside, swallowed by the stale air heavy with dust and oil. Inside, rows of outdated computers and tangled wires cluttered the cramped space. Marcus's fingers flew over the keyboard, the glow of the screen illuminating his focused expression. Eric stood watch, every muscle taut, ears straining for any hint of approaching footsteps. Sweat beaded on Marcus's brow as files began to download, financial ledgers, internal memos, names that confirmed their worst fears. Corruption reached farther than they imagined. State senators, federal agents, all tangled in the web of deceit protecting the mining operation. Suddenly, a piercing alarm shattered the silence. Red lights bathed the room in a sinister glow. They know we're here, Eric hissed, grabbing Marcus's arm. Panic ignited in Marcus's chest, but he forced himself to stay calm, clutching the portable drive with their precious data. Split up, Marcus ordered, heart pounding. Find the exits. They dashed into separate tunnels, the labyrinth twisting and turning, footsteps echoing close behind. Marcus's lungs burned, adrenaline sharpening his senses as he sprinted through the damp corridors, the sound of heavy boots growing nearer. A sudden shout echoed behind him, and a burst of gunfire ricocheted off metal walls. Marcus's mind raced. Where was Eric? He risked a glance over his shoulder. Eric was close, signaling frantically. Relief surged briefly before Marcus heard Frank's voice crackling over their radios. Move toward the old ventilation shaft. I'm drawing them off. Frank's tone was fierce, unwavering despite the danger. Marcus and Eric veered sharply, adrenaline fueling their sprint toward the narrow shaft. Frank's decoy had bought them crucial seconds. The sound of pursuit faded as they climbed into the shaft's cramped darkness, pulling themselves upward until they reached a hidden exit outside the compound. Gasping for air beneath the moonlight, Marcus and Eric didn't pause. They dashed through the forest toward the lodge, shadows stretching like silent sentinels. When they burst through the door, Frank was already there, eyes fierce but showing signs of strain. We did it, Marcus panted, dropping the drive on the table. The three men gathered around the glowing laptop, hands trembling as they opened the files. Each document peeled back layers of deceit, bribes funneled into political pockets, falsified environmental reports, secret expansion plans threatening protected lands. Frank's face tightened, grief and rage warring in his eyes. This goes all the way to the top, he muttered, voice low. We're up against more than just a greedy businessman now. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, the weight of responsibility settling like a stone in his gut. We have proof, but exposing this, it won't be easy. Powerful men will come after us. Eric sat back, exhaustion cracking his stoic facade. Are we ready for that? For the backlash, the threats? Marcus met his gaze steadily. We have to be. For Caleb. For the mountain. For everyone who's been silenced. The leaked documents hit the national news like a thunderclap, shattering the carefully built facade of Thomas Weller's empire. The screens across Ridgemont flickered with headlines exposing corruption, illegal mining, and environmental destruction. Streets once quiet now roared with the voices of protesters, their chants echoing through the cold morning air. The townsfolk, young and old, flooded city squares not only in Ridgemont but in nearby towns, demanding justice for the mountain and the memory of Caleb Turner. The raw urgency in their cries was a powerful reminder of what was at stake. Inside the makeshift command center hidden deep within the woods, Frank Turner sat slumped over a cluttered table, his face pale and drawn but his eyes burning with fierce determination. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, trying to stave off a growing headache. We've stirred the hornet's nest, he muttered, voice rough but steady. Across from him, Marcus leaned forward, scanning the latest news updates on his laptop, his fingers twitching with restless energy. They're hitting back hard, Marcus said, his tone tight with frustration. Lawsuits, media spin, smear campaigns. Weller's not going down without a fight. Frank nodded, his jaw clenched. And Liam Cross? He asked quietly. Leading the attacks, Marcus replied grimly. Last night, they broke up a rally downtown. Protest leaders beaten and threatened. It's escalating fast. His gaze darkened. They want to silence us. Outside, the winter wind whipped through the skeletal branches, carrying with it the distant rumble of unrest. The cold was biting, but it did nothing to cool the fire burning inside the community. Frank thought of Caleb, how his son had faced danger with quiet bravery, and felt a renewed sense of purpose. I'll be testifying tomorrow before the congressional inquiry, he said, voice low but unwavering. This time, they'll hear the truth. Meanwhile, Eric Hayes moved through the crowds, coordinating security for community meetings. His young face was set with determination, but beneath it, anxiety lurked. Every shadow seemed heavier, every glance more suspicious. We're the line between order and chaos now, Eric told a small group of volunteers, his voice calm but urgent. We keep this peaceful. We keep the focus on justice. Back in the cabin, the team's fragile unity took a sudden hit. Marcus's phone buzzed with an encrypted message that froze him in place. He read the words again, disbelief and betrayal washing over him like a cold wave. The figure known as Ghost, their mysterious ally inside Weller's operation, had been unmasked, an undercover agent for a rival mining corporation, using them to destabilize Weller's hold and seize the assets for his own company. Marcus's hands trembled as he shared the news. We've been played, he said, voice cracking. Everything we trusted. It was a lie. Frank's eyes flashed with anger and sorrow. Caleb warned us about the dangers, he said quietly, voice heavy with grief. Not just from Weller, but from those hiding behind masks. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them. Despite the blow, the team refused to crumble. With grim resolve, they turned to the environmental groups and honest officials who had stood by them. Together, they amplified the call for justice, rallying support beyond their small town. News cameras captured faces etched with determination and hope, a community fighting back against greed and corruption. But Weller, cornered and desperate, prepared a final, ruthless gambit. Late one evening, Marcus gathered the team around the flickering light of a camp lantern. His eyes were sharp, voice steady but urgent. If Weller manages to detonate that controlled explosion on the mountain, all the evidence, everything we've worked for, will be destroyed. He paused, the silence thick in the room. If he succeeds, all will be lost. The night air was thick and heavy, filled with the acrid scent of smoke and the distant hum of restless wind weaving through the dense pines. Frank's boots crunched softly over the brittle leaves as he led the small group through the mountain's shadows, every sense sharp and alert. His breath came in quiet, steady puffs, mixing with the cold night air, as his eyes scanned the darkness for any sign of movement. Beside him, Marcus clutched a handheld GPS tracker, its faint beep syncing with his racing heartbeat, while Eric kept a cautious eye on the perimeter, fingers twitching near the compact radio clipped to his vest. They moved with purpose, silent, calculated. Every step brought them closer to the blast zone, a place where the earth itself seemed restless, as if aware of the destruction about to be unleashed. Frank's mind replayed Caleb's smile, the dreams his son had carried for this mountain, now threatened by greed and violence. "This ends tonight," Frank muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible but filled with iron resolve. As they neared the clearing, faint glimmers of torchlight danced between the trees. Weller's men were there, rough silhouettes hunched over crates and twisted cables, setting charges with practiced hands. The sharp scent of gasoline and explosives stung Frank's nostrils, and the low murmur of guarded voices sliced through the stillness. Every muscle in Frank's body tensed as he signaled the group to halt. Suddenly, a low growl of warning came from Marcus's radio. "They've spotted us," Marcus hissed, eyes wide with alarm. The shadows erupted into chaos as the armed men spun around, weapons raised. Frank's voice was a harsh command. "Split up. Marcus, Eric, get to the charges and disarm them. I'll handle Cross." Liam Cross stepped forward, his expression cold and unyielding beneath the faint glow of the torches. His eyes locked onto Frank's with a predator's focus. "You're too late, Turner," Liam snarled, his voice like gravel. "This mountain belongs to men like Weller, not you." Frank's heart pounded fiercely, pain and fury igniting inside him. "It belongs to my son now, and to everyone who loves this land." With a sudden rush, Frank charged, fists swinging with brutal precision. The fight was fierce and unforgiving, their bodies clashing, breaths ragged and sharp, muscles straining under every blow. Frank's years of mountain rescue training blended with raw desperation, each strike a message. Justice would not be silenced. Behind them, Marcus knelt near the tangled web of wires. His fingers moved quickly but carefully, the cold biting into his skin. "Eric, we don't have much time," he urged, sweat beading on his forehead. Eric's eyes darted nervously as he cut one cable, then another, each snip a gamble against the ticking clock of destruction. "Almost there?" Eric breathed, hands trembling but steady. The night crackled with tension as Liam landed a vicious blow, knocking Frank back against a rough tree trunk. Pain flared, but Frank's resolve only hardened. Gritting his teeth, he pushed forward, grappling with Liam, twisting until the man's arm wrenched free. "Not tonight," Frank growled. Suddenly, Marcus's voice burst through the darkness. "I hacked the security system. Alarms are going off." Sirens howled in the distance, a rising tide of hope crashing against the mountain's shadows. The sudden noise scattered Weller's men, confusion breaking their ranks. "Get him!" Liam shouted, but the advantage had shifted. Police vehicles poured into the clearing, blue and red lights cutting through the night. Officers surrounded the attackers, cuffing Liam amid protests and gritted teeth. Frank staggered, sweat and dirt streaking his face, relief mingling with exhaustion. Across the ridge, a small plane roared away into the night sky, Weller fleeing, desperate and defeated. But the mountain was safe, at least for now. Frank's legs felt weak as he leaned against a tree, eyes drawn to the makeshift memorial where Caleb's photo fluttered in the wind. The cold bit into his skin, but inside, a fierce warmth glowed. Tears blurred his vision, mixing with the dust and sweat. "We fought for you, son. We brought the truth to light." Frank's boots crunched softly on the frost-hardened earth as he made his final steps toward the summit of Jackson Ridge. The cold morning air bit sharply at his face, but the clear sky stretched above him, vast and endless, promising a quiet stillness he hadn't felt in months. His breath came in steady puffs, each exhale fading into the crisp silence. Around him, the ridge stood stark, bare trees reaching like twisted fingers against the soft glow of dawn. The world below was just beginning to stir, the sleepy town of Ridgemont barely visible through a haze of early mist. He paused at the spot where they had found Caleb's belongings, those worn clothes and the cracked cell phone, frozen relics of a mystery that had haunted Frank's every waking thought. His fingers trembled slightly as he knelt, brushing the rough soil with a careful touch, as if the earth itself might whisper secrets. The memories pressed on him with the weight of years, the long search, the bitter nights filled with fear and hope, the anger at the silence that followed Caleb's last words. Frank's eyes welled with tears, but he fought to hold them back. "You're here," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "and I'm still fighting for you." The wind stirred around him, carrying a hollow echo that felt like Caleb's voice just beyond reach. The pain of loss was raw, a constant ache beneath his ribs, but beneath it also lay something new, an ember of peace born from the battles they had won. The mountain's cold fingers brushed his cheek as he stood, taking a slow, steady breath. Below, the valley stretched like a quilt of green and gold, the town now pulsing with life and cautious hope. Ridgemont had changed. The corruption that had shadowed their lives was being rooted out, replaced by a fragile trust. Frank's role as an environmental advisor kept him close to the land Caleb loved, a living promise that no secret would remain buried here again. In the distance, a faint sound drifted upward, a morning bird's call, a dog barking, the faint hum of waking life. Frank closed his eyes and let the quiet settle over him, his mind wandering to Marcus and Eric, the two young men who had carried the torch beside him. Marcus's foundation was growing, nurturing a new generation of voices who would protect the mountains and honor Caleb's courage. Eric's steady hands and worn badge were rebuilding bridges where once there had been suspicion and fear. A sudden flutter of movement caught Frank's attention. A lone hawk soared high above, wings spread wide against the morning light. The bird dipped and circled, as if marking the moment, a silent witness to their struggle and sacrifice. Frank's gaze followed it, feeling a kinship in its solitary strength. He whispered again, softer this time, "Your fight is over, son, but ours will never end." The mystery deepens, and the search continues. If you stand for truth, justice, and hope, hit subscribe and join the channel. Together we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional, created to explore themes of disappearance, survival, and mystery. Its purpose is to engage viewers and inspire reflection on the unknown and the search for truth.